The stories were always the same: tales to scare outsiders, keep kids in check, or just pass the time. I filled up the tank and drove off, the old man's warning fading from my thoughts. The Bird Ranch was about 20 miles from town, a large place surrounded by steep cliffs and stretches of sagebrush. The dirt road was barely a trail, and my truck kicked up enough dust to make it look like a sandstorm was following me. By the time I got there, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert. The house was old. Weathered wood, a sagging porch, and windows that seemed to watch you more than let you look out. I parked and stepped out, the hot air shifting to an eerie chill as the sun dipped lower. There was little sound here, just the wind rustling through the bushes and the occasional crow's call. As I walked toward the house, a feeling of unease crept over me. It wasn't fear, just a sense that the place didn't want me there. Inside, the first thing I noticed was the smell. A mix of mildew, dust, and something metallic. Blood, maybe? Then I saw the mess. Furniture flipped over, scratches in the wooden floors, and marks on the walls that looked like claws. This wasn't just property damage, it was like something out of a nightmare. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The insurance company would need proof, and I wasn't about to leave out any details. But as I moved deeper into the house, the chill returned. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the kind of chill that made you feel like something was watching you. That's when I heard it. A low growling sound from upstairs. My heart raced, and I froze, every instinct telling me to run. But curiosity got the better of me, and I climbed the stairs. The steps creaked under my feet, the sound echoing in the silent house. When I reached the top, the growling stopped. The hallway stretched out, lined with closed doors. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I took a cautious step forward, then another, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. One of the doors at the end of the hall was slightly open, and as I got closer, I saw something smeared on the wood. Blood. I pushed the door open with my boot, my pulse racing. The room was empty except for a broken mirror on the wall and a strange symbol carved into the floor. It looked ancient, like something from a history book, concentric circles with sharp lines radiating out. I snapped a photo, then turned to leave. That's when I heard it again. The growl. This time it was right behind me. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hand, and saw something moving in the shadows. It was fast, too fast to make out any details, but its shape was all wrong. It was hunched, with limbs that seemed too long, and its eyes glowed faintly in the beam of my flashlight. It didn't charge at me. It just stood there, watching, tilting its head like it was studying me. Every part of me screamed to run, but I couldn't. It was like the air itself was holding me in place. The creature let out a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a snarl. And then, just like that, it was gone, vanishing into the shadows like smoke. I don't remember leaving the house. The next thing I knew, I was in my truck, speeding down that dirt road, with the ranch shrinking in my rearview mirror. When I made it back to Bluff, the old man was waiting for me at the gas station. He didn't say a word, just gave me a look, like he knew what had happened. "Didn't listen, did you?" he finally asked, lighting a cigarette with a shaky hand. I didn't have the strength to argue. I just nodded, my mouth too dry to say anything. "Whatever it was you saw," he went on, "you're lucky it let you leave." Back in my motel room that night, I tried to tell myself it was all just in my head. Stress, the heat, exhaustion, anything to explain what I had seen. But when I uploaded the photos from my camera, there it was. A pair of glowing eyes staring at me from the shadows of that room. I didn't sleep that night, and I never went back to Bluff. Later, I sat with Cecil in a dimly lit room, surrounded by Navajo art and photographs. A single lamp flickered, casting enough light to make the room feel safe, like a fortress against whatever might be out there. Cecil set his rifle down close by and poured himself a drink. His hands were shaking as he lifted the glass. "You want one?" he asked, nodding toward the bottle. Yeah, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He poured another glass and slid it across the table. I took a sip, the burn of the whiskey grounding me for a moment. So, I said, leaning back in my chair, what exactly are we dealing with here? You know more than you're saying. Cecil stared into his glass for a long time before speaking. Been on this land my whole life. My daddy before me and his daddy before him. They always told me there are things out here. Things older than the desert itself. Most folks around here learn to live with them. Keep to the rules, stay out of their way, and they'll stay out of yours. Rules? I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. Like not going out after dark, not making noise, not looking for what don't want to be found. Tonight, we broke all of them. Cecil gave me a hard look. You brought it closer. Me? I shot back. I'm just here to assess your claim, not stir up ancient spirits or whatever you're talking about. Cecil let out a dry laugh and shook his head. It ain't spirits, son. Spirits don't leave claw marks on cattle or make sounds like that. It's something else. Something real. Before I could ask him more, a loud thud hit the side of the house, followed by the sound of something scraping against the wood. Cecil was up in an instant, grabbing his rifle and motioning for me to stay quiet. The sound moved along the house, slow and deliberate, like whatever was out there was testing the walls. My heart raced as I reached for my flashlight, but Cecil grabbed my arm. No light, he whispered. It'll see us! I nodded, swallowing hard as we stood there in the dim room, listening to whatever was outside. The scraping stopped, and a low, guttural growl rumbled through the walls. It was closer now. Too close. My mind raced, trying to figure out a plan, but there was nothing. We were trapped. Then, the thing howled. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard. Part animal, part something more unnatural. The sound sank deep into my bones. The room suddenly felt colder, and I could see my breath fogging in the air. What do we do? I whispered. Cecil didn't answer right away. He was staring at the front door, gripping the rifle so tight his knuckles turned white. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. We wait. It'll leave if we don't provoke it. For what felt like hours, we stood there in silence, listening to the thing move around outside. It circled the house, its heavy steps deliberate, punctuated by that eerie growl. At one point, it slammed into the door, rattling the whole place. I thought for sure it was coming in. But then the noise stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It stretched on, each second dragging like an eternity. While the hours stretched, the noise stopped, and the noise started, rattling my head. Cecil didn't move, didn't even blink. His eyes locked on the door. I was about to ask Cecil if he thought it was gone, when we heard it again. This time, on the roof. The sound of claws scraping against the shingles made my stomach twist. Cecil muttered a curse under his breath, his grip tightening on the rifle. Whatever happens, he said, don't run. It's faster. The next moments were a blur. There was a loud crash, the sound of a window shattering from one of the back rooms. Cecil turned, motioning for me to follow as he moved toward the noise. We stepped cautiously, the floorboards creaking under our weight. The room was dark, but the cold night air coming in through the broken window was unmistakable. Cecil raised his rifle, scanning the shadows. I fumbled with my flashlight, trying to keep it off, but ready to use it if we needed light. Then we heard it again. The growl. So close it felt like it was inside the room. My flashlight flicked on without thinking, the beam cutting through the darkness. And there it was. The creature crouched in the corner, its form barely human. Its skin was dark, leathery, and its eyes glowed faintly in the light. Long, twisted limbs ended in claws that looked like they could tear through steel. It let out a low, menacing snarl. For a moment, none of us moved. Then Cecil fired. The shot echoed deafening in the small space. The creature screeched, jerking violently as the bullet hit it, but it didn't fall. Instead, it lunged. Faster than anything I'd ever seen. Cecil yelled for me to run, but I froze, my legs refusing to move. The creature swiped at him, sending him crashing into the wall. Before it could turn to me, I finally found my legs and bolted. I sprinted out of the house, into the desert night, not stopping until I reached my truck. The keys were already in my hand, and the engine roared to life as I tore out of there, the ranch disappearing into the darkness behind me. I don't know how long I drove before I finally stopped, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Cecil didn't make it. As I sat there, staring at the empty road ahead, I realized I wouldn't be filing any insurance claim for the bird ranch. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something you could put a price on. Cecil had once laughed dryly, shaking his head. "What do you think, boy?" Sheriff came out once, took a look at the mess, said it was a cougar or maybe some dogs gone feral. Said to keep my livestock penned in tighter and keep my rifle handy. He gestured to the weapon leaning against the armchair. That was his grand solution. I frowned, taking another sip of the whiskey. What about the Navajo Nation? I sat there, frozen, listening to the tapping at the window. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch. That sound was deliberate, purposeful. Something was out there. I felt my heart thudding in my chest, a cold sweat creeping down my neck. For a moment, I considered getting up, looking out the window, but the fear that gripped me was too strong. I stayed still, hoping whatever it was would go away. But the tapping didn't stop. It grew louder, closer, more insistent. My mind raced, the images of the creature and the events at the ranch flooding back. I had to leave. Now. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, my body shaking as I moved toward the door. The tapping continued like a countdown. But as I reached for the door handle, it stopped. Dead silence. I froze, not daring to make a sound. Was it waiting for me to make the first move? I glanced around the room, looking for anything to defend myself with. Nothing. I grabbed my keys, my hand trembling as I clutched them. The fear gnawed at me, telling me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like the air itself was holding me captive. Then, a voice. It was faint, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. Come out. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command. It was an invitation. An invitation I knew I couldn't take. I backed away from the door slowly, my breath shallow, my heart hammering in my chest. I reached the far corner of the room and sat on the floor, my back pressed against the wall. The tapping had started again, this time faster, more frantic. I didn't know how much longer I could stay here, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever it wasn't going to leave me alone. Not now. Not ever. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat threatening to choke me. Every instinct screamed at me to choke me. Every instinct screamed at me to choke the down, but I couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. Something had happened to Cecil. Whatever was out there had found a way in, and it wasn't leaving until it had finished what it started. The trail of blood was fresh, dark, and smeared across the floor in long, jagged streaks. I followed it, my flashlight beam shaking as I moved. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end with every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The back door was still open, the desert night stretching beyond it, but I hesitated at the threshold, unwilling to step into that suffocating blackness. I shone the flashlight around the yard, but the light was swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Nothing moved, no sound except the distant whisper of wind. But something was wrong. The air was too still, the silence too complete.